Who Stalin Really Was. In the winter cold of December 1878, in a cramped room thick with the smell of leather and sweat, a child was born in the Georgian town of Gori, a place of dusty streets and ancient stone fortresses where the Caucasus Mountains loomed like sentinels over a world caught between empires. His mother, Ketevan, called him Ioseb, though the Russian world would come to know him as Joseph, and history would remember him by a name he chose himself, a name meaning steel. But in those early days, there was no steel, only a small body marked by poverty and violence, born into a world where survival itself was a daily negotiation with hunger and brutality. His father, Vissarion, was a cobbler whose hands knew the craft of shaping leather, but whose heart had been hollowed out by vodka and rage. The boy grew up in the shadow of those fists, learning early that the world was a place of pain, that tenderness was rare as gold, that power resided not in love but in the ability to inflict fear. His mother worked as a washerwoman, her fingers raw from lye and cold water, scrubbing the linens of those who had more, always more, while her son watched and absorbed the mathematics of inequality. She dreamed of the priesthood for him, saw in his sharp mind a path away from the squalor, a route toward respectability in the service of God. The boy was small, smaller than the other children, and his face bore the scars of smallpox that had nearly killed him at 7, pockmarks that would remain throughout his life like a map of early suffering. His left arm was damaged, some said from a childhood accident, others whispered it was from a beating, and it hung slightly crooked, a physical reminder of vulnerability he would spend his life compensating for with shows of strength. He learned to fight back, not always with his fists, though he could do that too, but with his mind, with cunning, with the ability to hold a grudge like a coal burning in the darkness of his chest. At the Gori Church School, and later at the Tiflis Theological Seminary where his mother's dreams carried him, young Ioseb Jugashvili discovered books. He devoured them with a hunger that matched his physical hunger, reading everything he could find, Russian literature, Georgian poetry, and then, secretly, dangerously, the forbidden texts that circulated in whispers among the students, the revolutionary pamphlets that spoke of a world transformed, of workers rising, of the mighty brought low. In the seminary's stone corridors, where future priests memorized scripture and sang liturgies in voices that echoed toward heaven, he found Marx and Lenin, and those words burned in his mind brighter than any prayer. The seminary was a place of rules, rigid and suffocating, and he chafed against them all. He organized secret reading circles, shared banned literature, questioned everything the black-robed monks taught about submission and humility. They found his hidden books, they disciplined him, watched him, and in 1899, at the age of 20, he was expelled, though later he would claim he left by choice, because revolutionaries do not submit to expulsion, they choose their own paths. The truth, as always with him, was more complicated, more human, more desperate. Free from the seminary, he threw himself into the revolutionary underground of the Caucasus, that seething world of workers' strikes and secret meetings in basements and forests, where men and women risked everything for a vision of justice that existed nowhere yet except in their heated arguments and their dangerous dreams. He became a Marxist, not out of intellectual abstraction but from the bone-deep knowledge of what it meant to be powerless, to watch your mother's hands bleed, to feel your father's fists, to see the rich pass by in carriages while children went hungry in the streets. In those years around the turn of the century, as the old order began to crack and tremble, he adopted the revolutionary underground name Koba, after a Georgian folk hero, a rebel and avenger. He organized strikes among Tiflis railway workers and Batum oil workers, watching them march with new courage, hearing their voices rise in songs of defiance. He wrote articles for underground newspapers, his prose sharp and unforgiving, cutting through liberal compromise to demand total transformation. The Tsarist police arrested him in 1902, and he knew for the first time the inside of a prison cell, the weight of chains, the taste of bread that was more sawdust than wheat. They sent him to Siberia, to that vast frozen emptiness where the empire dispatched those it wished to forget, and there in the bitter cold and endless white, He learned patience of a different kind, the patience of survival, the long game of waiting and planning. But Siberia could not hold him. He escaped, as he would escape again and again throughout those years, each time making his way back across impossible distances to the revolutionary struggle, because something in him refused to accept imprisonment, refused to accept any limitation imposed from outside. In 1905, as revolution swept across Russia and the empire shuddered from strikes and uprisings and the blood of Bloody Sunday staining the snow in St. Petersburg, Koba was there in the Caucasus, organizing, agitating, pushing for more radical action. He met Vladimir Lenin for the first time at a Bolshevik conference in Finland, and something in that meeting marked him. Lenin was already the undisputed leader, the brain of the revolution, a man who could theorize the overthrow of empires and make it sound inevitable. Koba listened, absorbed, calculated. He was not a great orator like Trotsky, not a profound theorist like Bukharin, but he had other skills, darker skills perhaps, the ability to organize, to discipline, to know who could be trusted and who needed to be removed. The years between 1905 and 1917 were years of raids and arrests and escapes, of living under false names and forged documents, of sleeping in different beds every night because the Okhrana, the Tsarist secret police, were always hunting. He married a Georgian woman, Kato Svanidze, and for a brief moment knew something like ordinary happiness, but she died of typhus in 1907, and he stood at her grave and reportedly said that with her died any warm feelings he had left for humanity. Whether he truly said this, whether it was true, who can say, but something hardened in him after that. Something closed like a door shutting on a room that would never again be entered. He became the Bolshevik Party's specialist in what they called expropriations, which meant robberies, bank heists to fund the revolution. The most famous was in Tiflis in 1907, a brazen daylight robbery that killed dozens and netted thousands of rubles. He planned it though others carried it out, and this pattern would repeat throughout his life, the orchestrator at a remove, the conductor whose hands stayed clean while others did the bloody work. Some in the party were horrified by these methods, but Lenin defended them, defended him, because Lenin understood that revolution required not just ideas but money, weapons, ruthless pragmatism. During a longer exile in Siberia beginning in 1913, he took the name Stalin, meaning man of steel, and the name stuck because it fit something in him that was becoming fixed and unbreakable and cold. He spent those years studying the national question, writing a treatise on Marxism and nationalism that Lenin praised, establishing himself as more than just a practitioner of violence, but as a theorist, a serious member of the leadership. When revolution finally came in February 1917, he was still in Siberia, and he made his way back to Petrograd, to the heart of the empire that was now tearing itself apart. The revolution he returned to was chaotic, euphoric, terrifying. The Tsar had fallen, and in the vacuum 100 factions vied for power. The provisional government tried to maintain order while the Soviets, the workers' councils, claimed to represent the people's will. Stalin was not among the most visible Bolsheviks in those early months. That spotlight belonged to Lenin, returned from exile, and to Trotsky, whose oratory could move crowds to tears or to violence. Stalin worked in the background, on the party's central committee, editing the newspaper Pravda, organizing, always organizing, building networks of loyalty that would matter later when the time came to consolidate power. When Lenin and the Bolsheviks seized power in October 1917, storming the Winter Palace in an act that would echo through the century, Stalin was there, though not in the front lines. He was appointed People's Commissar for Nationalities, responsible for managing the empire's vast diversity of peoples, and it was work that suited his understanding of how power operated across ethnic and cultural lines. The revolution had succeeded, but survival was another matter entirely. Civil war erupted, and for 3 years Russia burned and bled as red armies fought white armies and foreign interventionists, and millions died in the fighting and the famines and the terror. Stalin proved himself during the Civil War not as a military genius but as a political enforcer, someone willing to do what needed doing without moral hesitation. He was sent to various fronts as a political commissar, and where he went, discipline followed, and sometimes death for those judged insufficiently committed. He clashed with Trotsky, who as commissar for war was technically his superior, and in those clashes the seeds of future conflicts were planted. He defended Tsaritsyn, later renamed Stalingrad, and claimed credit for its salvation, though historians would debate how much his presence truly mattered. What mattered was that he was building a reputation as a man who got things done, who didn't flinch from harsh measures, who understood that revolution in practice meant making terrible choices and living with them. When the Civil War ended in 1921 and the Bolsheviks had secured their power, though over a devastated country of empty factories and starving cities, the real struggle began, the struggle for the soul and direction of the revolution itself. Lenin had led them to victory, but Lenin was fading, his health destroyed by strokes, and everyone knew a succession struggle was coming. The obvious heir was Trotsky, brilliant and bold, the hero of the revolution, but he was also arrogant and made enemies easily, and he underestimated the quiet man who had become General Secretary of the Communist Party in 1922. The position of General Secretary seemed administrative, bureaucratic, the kind of job that attracted little glory, but Stalin understood what others missed, that control of personnel meant control of the party, that the person who appointed officials at every level was the person who would ultimately command their loyalty. He stacked the party apparatus with his people, built a machine that responded to him, and he waited. Lenin, in his final months of lucidity, grew alarmed at what he saw in Stalin, wrote in his political testament that Stalin had concentrated too much power and was too crude, that he should be removed as General Secretary. But Lenin's testament was suppressed after his death in January 1924, and Stalin, working with Zinoviev and Kamenev, outmaneuvered Trotsky politically. The succession struggle played out over years, a Byzantine series of alliances and betrayals, of speeches and votes in party congresses, of ideological debates that were really about power. Stalin presented himself as a moderate, the defender of Lenin's legacy, the practical man who wanted to build socialism in one country rather than risk everything on Trotsky's dream of permanent worldwide revolution. He allied with the right against Trotsky and the left, then turned on his right-wing allies once the left was defeated. One by one, the old revolutionaries, the men who had made October, were politically destroyed, expelled from the party, exiled, forced to recant. Trotsky was expelled from the Soviet Union in 1929, sent into exile from which he would never return, though Stalin's agents would eventually find him even there, even in Mexico, even across an ocean and a decade later. By the end of the 1920s, Stalin stood alone at the pinnacle of power, and the question was what he would do with it. The answer came swiftly and with a violence that would reshape the nation and the century. He launched the collectivization of agriculture, forcing millions of peasants off their individual plots and onto collective farms, confiscating their grain, their livestock, their very way of life. Those who resisted, the kulaks as they were labeled, were deported to Siberia or executed, and when Ukraine resisted, when the Ukrainian peasants hid grain and slaughtered livestock rather than surrender them, he weaponized famine, allowed millions to starve in what would become known as the Holodomor. The countryside became a battlefield, and the death toll climbed into the millions, though the exact number would never be known because some deaths leave no records, only empty villages and fields gone silent. Simultaneously, he forced industrialization at a pace that defied human capacity, mobilizing the entire society to build factories and dams and railway lines, demanding quotas that could not be met and punishing failure with imprisonment or death. Workers labored under conditions that recalled the worst of the Industrial Revolution, and when they faltered, they were accused of sabotage, of being enemies of the people, and the labor camps of the Gulag swelled with prisoners sent to mine gold and timber in frozen wastelands where life was measured not in years but in the ability to survive another day. By the mid-1930s, the revolution had devoured its children. Stalin, seeing enemies everywhere, perhaps because he knew what he himself was capable of, launched a Great Terror, a purge of the party, the military, the intelligentsia, of anyone who might pose a threat or who simply had the misfortune to be in the wrong place when the quota of arrests needed to be filled. Old Bolsheviks who had fought alongside Lenin were arrested, tortured until they confessed to impossible conspiracies, then shot in the basement of the Lubyanka or sent to die slowly in the camps. Show trials paraded broken men before the world, and the world watched in horror or disbelief as revolutionaries confessed to being capitalist spies and wreckers. The man who had been born Ioseb Jagashvili, who had been Koba the revolutionary, who had become Stalin the general secretary, was now something else entirely, a figure whose word meant life or death for millions, whose image hung in every office and home, whose cult of personality transformed him from a man into an icon, the father of peoples, the genius leader, the greatest of all time. He received reports of the arrests and signed lists of names to be executed, sometimes hundreds in an evening, then watched movies in his private cinema or hosted long dinners where terrified officials drank and laughed on command and tried not to say anything that might be interpreted as disloyalty. He lived in the Kremlin, in rooms that were modest by the standards of absolute power, but he was never truly alone because absolute power is itself a kind of prison, surrounded by those who fear you, who tell you what you want to hear, who smile while calculating their own survival. His children suffered under the weight of his name. His son Yakov, captured by the Germans in war, would die in a prison camp while Stalin refused to negotiate for him, and his daughter Svetlana would eventually flee to the West, unable to bear the legacy. He trusted no one, and this lack of trust became a self-fulfilling prophecy as even those closest to him feared him too much to tell him the truth. The question of who Stalin really was cannot be answered with simple labels, monster or great leader, because the truth is more terrible and more human than that. He was a man shaped by violence and poverty who rose through intelligence and ruthlessness to command an empire, who genuinely believed he was building a better world and was willing to sacrifice millions to achieve it, who confused his own power with the revolution's ideals until they became inseparable. He was capable of courtesy and even charm, could quote Russian poetry from memory, appreciated Georgian wine and good food, and also signed death warrants before breakfast without apparent emotion. The ideology he claimed to serve, the Marxism-Leninism that promised liberation, became in his hands an instrument of oppression as total as any Tsarist autocracy, proving perhaps that the means shape the ends more than any revolutionary theory can overcome. He transformed the Soviet Union from a backward agricultural country into an industrial superpower capable of defeating Nazi Germany. But the cost in human life and human dignity was so enormous that even now, decades after his death in 1953, the reckoning continues. And perhaps that is who Stalin really was. Not a devil or a god, but a man who proved that ideology without humanity becomes another form of tyranny, that revolution without mercy becomes indistinguishable from the system it sought to replace, that the pursuit of utopia through violence leads not to paradise but to a pyramid of skulls upon which one man stands alone, calling it progress.